The story begins before dawn on March 1st, 1896, high in the rocky hills of northern Ethiopia. In the soft light of sunrise, two armies prepared for combat on the field near the town of Adwa. On one side stood Emperor Menelik II of Ethiopia, an emperor who had spent years uniting his fractious kingdom and quietly stockpiling modern rifles and ammunition. On the other, a force of professional Italian soldiers under General Oreste Baratieri, confident that the new nation of Italy would easily carve out an African empire for itself. But Ethiopia was no typical African colony. It was an ancient Christian empire, a realm that Menelik often said has been for 14 centuries a Christian island in a sea of pagans. The Ethiopians believed they were fighting not just for territory, but for their very identity. By the late 19th century, the European scramble for Africa was nearly complete. By 1885, only Liberia and Ethiopia remained free. All around Ethiopia, national flags of France, Britain, Germany, and Italy fluttered over conquered lands. Italy, the newest European power, had its eyes on the Horn of Africa. In 1889, Menelik reluctantly signed the Treaty of Wuchal with Italy, yielding some disputed border territory and obtaining a shipment of modern rifles. But the Italians had slipped a poison into the treaty. The Italian and Amharic versions differed. In the Italian text, Article 17 made Ethiopia a protectorate of Italy. In the Amharic version, it did nothing of the sort. When Menelik discovered this betrayal, he repudiated the treaty. Italy, stung and insulted, prepared to punish Ethiopia by force. From late 1895, a sense of imminent conflict hung over Ethiopia. The Italian government, under Prime Minister Francesco Crispi, poured money and soldiers into its new colony of Eritrea, snapping up ports along the Red Sea and dreaming of marching into Addis Ababa. Genoa's shipyards swelled and barracks swelled as Italy recruited 10,000 more troops and raised a war budget of millions of lira. Italian newspapers and military planners took it for granted that an Abyssinian victory was unthinkable. Yet inside Ethiopia, Emperor Menelik II was quietly pulling every lever of statecraft to meet the challenge. Fluent in several European and African languages, a keen diplomat and visionary, he had already modernized his nation far more than outsiders realized. Addis Ababa, his mountain capital, buzzed with new technologies, telegraphs, telephones, a railway under construction. And the hallways of Menelik's palace were filled with foreign advisors, like Swiss engineer Alfred Ilg. Ilg and others helped build roads and bridges and fed stories to the European press, praising Menelik as a devout, savvy leader of a free Christian nation. Emissaries from Ethiopia carried exotic gifts and phonograph recordings of Ethiopian hymns on European tours. Everywhere, Menelik wanted the world to see that Ethiopia was a cultured, civilized kingdom, not a primitive target for empire. Behind this propaganda, Menelik quietly built a magnificent arsenal. Over the 1890s, he negotiated directly with arms merchants and even obtained vast shipments of rifles, ammunition, and artillery from Russia, France, and Britain. By the time Italy issued its war ultimatum, Menelik's government had spent over $1 million in 1895 money on munitions. When mobilization orders went out in September 1895, a flood of weapons flowed through the empire. Menelik eventually could field on the order of 70,000 to 100,000 modern rifles and 5 million cartridges. These arms were distributed to tens of thousands of men. Within weeks of Menelik's proclamation, more than 100,000 troops answered the call. The Ethiopian army was truly national, drawing warriors from virtually every region and ethnic group. Ras Makanan of Harar, father of the future Haile Selassie, brought about 12,000 men, Ras Mengesha of Tigray about 8,000, Negus Tekle Haimano of Gojam another 6,000, Wagshum Gwangul of Wollo 5,000, and numerous other noblemen and local chiefs each mustered a few thousand. Even Empress Taitu, Menelik's quick-witted wife, raised her own contingent of roughly 6,000 warriors. Menelik himself took command of about 35,000 troops, many of them his personal Showan guards and nobles. In all, when the clouds of war gathered, the Ethiopian field force swelled to somewhere between 80,000 and 120,000 men. an army by far the largest of any African power at that time. Crucially, Menelik also outmaneuvered his enemy by bringing this army to bear at the right place and time. The Italians had expected easy victories in the highlands. Having already defeated local rulers and grabbed Eritrea, they presumed they could defeat fragmented Abyssinian lords piecemeal. But Menelik adopted the opposite tack, never letting the Italians engage half of his forces at a time. Instead, he concentrated his armies. When he learned that General Baratieri was near Adwa by early February 1896, Menelik awaited the perfect moment. According to the Ethiopian Crown Council, Menelik's main strategic imperative was simply to avoid piecemeal skirmishes and instead draw the Italian army into one decisive engagement, where his infantry and artillery could overwhelm them. He insisted that all his vassals throw in their lot by agreeing to serve under one commander, namely himself, and to bring all their supplies with them. In this way, the provincial princes contributed not only soldiers, but also the oxen, grain, horses, and equipment needed to sustain a large field army. By early 1896, nearly all of Ethiopia was on war footing, working toward a single purpose. As winter turned to spring, the Italian commander, fearful of action without orders, hesitated in the face of these masses. By February 1896, Baratieri's 18,000 men had not yet clashed with the Ethiopians, who occupied high ground and were rumored to number 6 times that of Italy. In fact, Menelik greatly exaggerated his strengths and misled the Italians. Ethiopian scouts planted stories of internal quarrels and a fraction of the troop force. Meanwhile, the threat of famine in the highlands forced Menelik into action. At the very end of February, Prime Minister Crispi sent Baratieri an angry telegram: "Fight now or face disgrace." Realizing he could not retreat without losing face, Baratieri reluctantly ordered an attack on March 1st. At dawn on March 1st, the Italian columns moved into position. The tactics of the day were dramatically asymmetric. Menelik divided his vast army into several corps under his chiefs. Ras Makonnen and Ras Mengesha commanded huge flanks. Empress Taitu took charge of the center reserve, and the emperor himself oversaw the battle's coordination. Menelik's tens of thousands of riflemen were arranged to descend on the Italians from all directions on the slopes of the Kidan Miret Ridge, west of Adwa. The Italians, for their part, were strung out in 3 brigades marching on difficult, unfamiliar terrain. Within hours, Ethiopia's plan worked flawlessly. Ethiopian sharpshooters on the high ground opened fire, pinning down the Italian advance. As the attackers came into range, flanking columns rushed the Italian sides. The story of the battle, often passed down in Ethiopian folktales, has the Italians paralyzed by thirst and confusion. Days before the fighting, Empress Taitu had anticipated where the Italians would camp and sent a detachment of her guards to seize every nearby water source. By the time the first shots rang out, the Italians were reportedly out of water. Under the merciless sun, men began to collapse of thirst. Historians of the battle stress that 1,000 special guards under Taitu had secured the wells around Adwa, so that the Italians, upon discovering the situation, were unable to find water and were repeatedly driven back by Ethiopian counterattacks. Taitu then personally joined the front lines. On the ridge, she hurried 5,000 of her own warriors to strengthen the emperor's tent and guard the center of the position. Within hours, the seemingly steady Italian columns unraveled. Baratieri's troops, well-trained but fatally outnumbered, came under murderous fire from every side. The rocky hills of Ethiopia negated much of the Italian artillery and disciplined formations. It was, as one historian put it, a rout. By midday, the Italians were falling back, pursued by Ethiopian cavalry and infantry. Italian units became disorganized in the chaos of close combat on the steep slopes. Emperor Menelik's premonition was confirmed. Instead of retreat, the Italians tried to flee uphill, and this only accelerated their defeat. Contemporary accounts describe the battlefield strewn with bodies. When the smoke cleared, Italy's army was shattered. An estimated 6,000 Italian officers and soldiers lay dead, more than half of the force. Thousands more were wounded or missing. The Italians abandoned virtually all their artillery and ammunition on the field. Menelik's generals collected about 3,000 Italian prisoners, entire regiments who had begged for mercy. Some Ethiopian reports say that Italian casualty rates approached 70%. By contrast, Ethiopian casualties, though bloody, were relatively lower. Roughly 5,000 killed and 8,000 wounded out of 100,000. In the end, Ethiopia had clearly won the day. Even more telling than the body count were the post-battle scenes in Addis Ababa. Menelik received the Italian captives with unexpected generosity. The once proud white soldiers were fed, clothed, and gradually escorted back to the coast. Whites at the mercy of blacks was an expression used in Western papers. For their part, Italian historians note in hushed tones that African Ascari troops fighting for Italy suffered far worse. Many of the black mercenaries captured by Ethiopians had their hands cruelly chopped off as traitors. But no such vengeance was taken on the Italian prisoners. Emperor Menelik quietly understood that sparing the enemy was a show of strength. Across Ethiopia that evening, church bells tolled and bonfires blazed. In every home, families gave thanks. Women who had marched and cooked for the armies now tended the wounded. Tens of thousands of Abyssinian women had accompanied the campaign, carrying water, cooking food, nursing injuries, and even firing weapons when needed. The Ethiopian news agency would later note that women took part in the war, served as water distributors, medical care, prison guards, and morale boosters. Empress II became a legend. She had not only looked after the emperor and army, but acted as a brilliant tactician. Ethiopian historians emphasize that Empress II Batul was an ingenious commandant, well-versed in the art of war, a tactician par excellence. Many stories credit her with the water tactic and with personally fortifying the camp's defenses. In Addis and Gojam, women sang songs of victory and praise, poems about sisters, mothers, and daughters who helped crush the invader. One writer noted decades later that the Battle of Adwa ascertained genuine gender equality, since women's patriotism was unparalleled in that campaign. By nightfall on March 1st, 1896, the message had gone out. Ethiopia would not be Italy's colony. Far from it, the conqueror had become the conquered. In Italy, the news provoked shock and outrage. Reports from Rome described crowds in the streets in a condition of excitement, grief, and anger almost beyond description. Women and children tried to stop their men from boarding troop trains, tearing up tracks, and even beating officers to prevent another advance. Brigandages erupted in northern Italy. The king's government teetered. A grand spectacle of national mourning took place, with barred windows and black flags across the peninsula. Prime Minister Crispi, humiliated, resigned amid public uproar. The club with no doors, as Italians called their parliament, held emergency sessions. Some newspapers even argued that Italy should abandon Africa entirely. It was the first time since the Middle Ages that a European power suffered such a disaster at the hands of a non-European army. Meanwhile, Ethiopia's victory ricocheted around the world. To his own people, Menelik declared that God had smiled on them. Throughout Africa and the African diaspora, the news was a revelation. In the worst hour of colonial expansion, a proud African nation had blunted the advance of empire. Historians have noted that Adwa reopened questions of race and empire, forcing Europe to reconsider its assumptions. For Black Africans and African Americans, Adwa became a symbol of resistance. In the United States, Harlem newspapers spread the story. Marcus Garvey quoted it as proof that colonialism could be overturned. When Menelik's ambassadors traveled to the U.S., they were greeted as African royalty. In the Caribbean and Latin America, people of African descent sang Ethiopian songs of triumph. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church and even the memory of the Ark of the Covenant in Jerusalem began to symbolize a special African pride. Ethiopia briefly became a kind of Zion for global Africa. Marcus Garvey would say that Adwa proved Ethiopia, and by extension all Black people, deserve self-rule. In decades to come, Winston Churchill's ally Nelson Mandela would list Adwa among the historic inspirations of the African liberation movements. Rastafarians in Jamaica made Emperor Haile Selassie, a descendant of Menelik, their messiah and celebrate Adwa Day to this day. Back in Africa, the respected victory of Adwa altered colonial politics. European powers now treated Ethiopia differently. The Treaty of Addis Ababa, signed in October 1896, officially nullified the Wuchela Treaty. It recognized Menelik as the lawful sovereign, and Italy abandoned any claim to protect or possess Ethiopia. In fact, Italy's colony of Eritrea was shrunken to just over 80,000 square miles by a peace treaty in 1900. Britain and France, concerned to keep stability, negotiated new borders with Menelik's government in the following years. From 1896 until World War I, Ethiopia stood alone in Africa as an independent nation. Menelik's victory gave him significant credibility with the European powers and provided the Ethiopian kingdom with a period of peace in which it was able to expand and flourish, in contrast to most of the rest of the African continent. He annexed neighboring provinces in the south and west, extended telephone and telegraph lines, completed the long-awaited railroad to Djibouti, introduced a national currency, and built new schools and bridges. The world of colonial empires would not soon forget Adwa. In Italy, it became an obsession, a wound that would not heal. Many Italians sought retribution. General Baratieri was tried for incompetence, though acquitted. When Mussolini came to power in the 1930s, he vowed to avenge Adwa. In 1935, Italian planes bombed and gassed Ethiopia, launching the Second Italo-Ethiopian War. Brutality reigned on Ethiopia's countryside, but Ethiopians rallied under the banners that Menelik and Taitu had won. A new generation of fighters, the Black Lions among them, felt inspired by their grandparents' victory at Adwa. It is said that even during the occupation by fascist Italy, Ethiopian patriots would softly sing the old Adwa war songs in secret or recite the poem inscribed on the Adwa Victory Day medal, so that the memory remained a talisman of hope. This was no passing chapter of history. One Washington Post reviewer of a 1999 documentary on Adwa observed that Americans and Ethiopians alike learned about the battle primarily through 100 years of oral tradition. Villagers across Ethiopia still tell the story. Children grow up with Adwa painted as a cosmic showdown, a time when inferior arms and numbers did not matter. Faith, courage, and unity did. The Ethiopian year still counts by the Alexandrian calendar, and in churches on Adwa Victory Day, the liturgy recalls that deliverance was granted to the faithful people of Ethiopia. In Addis Ababa, there is a grand monument at the spot of the battle where school children regularly pay respects. The official history taught in Ethiopia emphasizes the logistical genius and cultural resilience that Menelik's empire displayed. Scholars point out that Menelik mobilized armies through a traditional, non-monetized land system, the Gabar system, marrying ancient customs to modern tactics. In the end, the Battle of Adwa stands as an epic example of an underdog triumphing through strategy and spirit. Emperor Menelik's waiting strategy, forcing the Italians to exhaust themselves on hostile terrain, has been studied in military academies ever since. The geographic intelligence of the Ethiopians, the steadiness of their ranks under rifle fire, and the unexpected involvement of women and clergy all testify to a society that had been mobilized at every level. As one historian observes, Europeans had never expected a spontaneously assembled coalition of tribal kings, warriors, even women and children to successfully challenge a modern army. By defeating Italy, Ethiopia did something unprecedented. It issued a global challenge to imperial ideology. As Raymond Jonas notes, Adwa cast doubt upon the unshakable certainty of the age, that sooner or later all Africans would fall under the rule of Europeans. European newspapers of the time grudgingly admitted that Adwa should teach European nations to take the Abyssinians as they are, not as racial prejudice would have them to be. In the decades since, the memory of Adwa has loomed large in the story of Africa and the African diaspora. Today, scholars and storytellers still unearth new facets of the tale. There is a proud line of Ethiopian music and poetry dedicated to Adwa. Traditional singers, Asmari and priests alike, have passed down ballads of the battle. In Ethiopian schools, children are taught about the empress who fought with the men and the people who carried millions of rounds of ammo across mountains. Historians in Addis Ababa have painstakingly documented which villages sent how many fighters, and oral history projects record the testimony of farmers whose grandfathers saw the gun smoke on Adwa's ridges. Internationally, Adwa is commemorated at Pan-African gatherings, and it is widely cited in studies of anti-colonial resistance. The story of that day, its strategic cunning, its collective sacrifice, its symbolism, is now well known, but until recently, much of it was preserved out of school textbooks and hidden in private memories. Even today, one finds that older Ethiopians recount details that surprise outsiders. For example, the exact creeks where water was seized, or the prayers men said before battle. In that way, the untold story of Adwa is not so much unknown as it is understood through a different medium, not only through the reports of diplomats or the pages of European books, but through the songs of grandmothers and the ceremonies of church. This human tapestry, woven from Christian faith, ethnic unity, and sheer will, is as much a part of Adwa's legacy as the artillery it left behind. Above all, Adwa remains a testament to Ethiopian cultural resilience and genius. Ethiopia in the 1890s had no standing army in the European sense, yet Menelik's regime improvised one so effective that it could outpace and outfight a major power. They achieved this through old systems retooled for modern war, by organizing supplies through communal land grants, by moving millions of rounds of ammo by mule caravans, by forging alliances among rival princes, and by instilling pride so fierce that mothers and daughters cheered as sons marched to battle. As even a few late 19th century European observers acknowledged, Adwa taught the world that Ethiopia stood as a living rebuke to the whole colonial era. It taught Africans that victory was possible. In the voiceover of history, the Battle of Adwa echoes as a continuous, magnificent narrative, a story of leaders and ordinary people, men and women mirroring the very soul of a nation that refused to fall.